He then entered the sacred hall to face the wall opposite the door, and there again performed devout prostrations, and went around acclaiming Allah's greatness and oneness. Shortly afterwards, he returned to the doorway and standing upon its elevated step, gazed in thankfulness on the thronging multitude below and delivered the following celebrated address: "There is no God but Allah alone. He has no associates." He made good his promise that he held to his slave and helped him and defeated all the Confederates along. Bear in mind that every claim of privilege, whether that of blood or property, is under my heel, except that of the custody of Al-Kaaba and supplying of water to the pilgrims. Bear in mind that for anyone who is slain, even though semi-deliberately, with club or whip, for him the blood money is very severe, 100 camels, 40 of them to be pregnant. O people of Quraysh, surely Allah has abolished from you all pride of the pre-Islamic era and all conceit in your ancestry, because all men are descended from Adam, and Adam was made out of clay. He then recited to them the verse, O mankind, we have created you from a male and a female, and made you into nations and tribes, that you may know one another. Verily, the most honorable of you near Allah is that believer who has at-taqwa, i.e. one of the muttaqun, i.e. pious and righteous persons who fear Allah much, abstain from all kinds of sins and evil deeds, which He has forbidden, and love Allah much, perform all kinds of good deeds which He has ordained. Verily, Allah is all-knowing, all-aware. Al-Quran 49:13. He further added, O you people of Quraysh, what do you think of the treatment that I am about to accord to you? They replied, O noble brother and son of noble brother, we expect nothing but goodness from you. Upon this he said, I speak to you in the same words as Yusuf, the prophet Joseph, spoke unto his brothers. He said, no reproach on you this day. Al-Quran 12:92, Go your way, for you are freed ones. As for the doorkeeping of Al-Kaaba and supplying of water to pilgrims, the Prophet, PBUH, ordered that these jobs remain in the hand of Uthman bin Talha and that the key will stay with him and his descendants forever. When time for prayer approached, Bilal ascended Al-Kaaba and called for prayer. Abu Sufyan bin Harb, Etab bin Usaid and Al-Harith bin Hisham were meanwhile sitting in the yard. Etab bin Usaid commented on the new situation, Bilal ascending Al-Kaaba and calling for prayer, saying that Allah honored Usaid, his father, having not heard such words. The Prophet, PBUH, approached and assisted by divine revelation told them that he had learnt about what they had spoken of. Al-Harith and Etab, taken by incredible surprise, immediately professed Islam and bore witness to the messengership of Muhammad, PBUH, adding that we swear by Allah that none had been with us to inform you. On that very day, the Prophet, PBUH, entered Hani house where he washed and offered prayers of victory. Hani had sheltered two Makan relatives of hers in her house, in which act she was granted support by the Prophet, PBUH. Shedding blood of 9 arch-criminals was declared lawful even under the curtains of Al-Kaaba. Nevertheless, only 4 of them were killed while the others were pardoned for different reasons. As for those who were killed, mention could be made of Abdul-Uzza bin Qadil, who had become a Muslim and then deputed to collect alms tax in the company of a helper. They had also a slave with them. Abdullah, in a fit of rage, killed the helper's slave on account of a mere trifling dispute, and joined the pagan Arabs as an apostate. He was never repentant at this heinous crime, but rather employed 2 women singers and incited them to sing satirically about the Prophet, PBUH. The other man who was put to death was Mikyas bin Sababa. He was a Muslim. A helper accidentally killed his brother Hisham. The Prophet, PBUH, had arranged the payment of blood money to him, which he had accepted. His revengeful nature, however, was never appeased, so he killed the helper and went to Makkah as an apostate. Similarly, Hawarth and 1 woman singer went to death. On the other hand, every attempt was made to grant pardon to the people. Ikrimah bin Abu Jahl, who had attacked Khalid's detachment at the time of the entry into Makkah, was forgiven. To Washi, the murderer of Hamza, the Prophet's uncle, and to Hind, who had chewed his liver, was also extended his generous clemency. The same generous treatment was accorded to Habar, who had attacked the Prophet's daughter with a spear, while on her way from Makkah to Medina, so grievously that she ultimately died of the fatal injuries. In the same context of magnanimity peculiar to Muhammad, Pbuh, 2 chiefs of Quraysh were pardoned once they had embraced Islam. They were Safwan bin Umayyah and Fudala bin Umair. The latter had attempted to assassinate the Prophet, Pbuh, while circumambulating in the holy sanctuary. The Prophet's matchless tolerance and broad-mindedness, instigated by his mission as a mercy to all people, converted a terrible hypocrite into a faithful devout believer. On the second day of the great conquest, the Prophet, Pbuh, stood up and addressed the people in matters relating to the holy status of Makkah. After entertaining Allah's praise, he proclaimed that Makkah was a holy land and would remain so till the day of judgment. No bloodshed was allowed therein. Should anyone take the liberty of fighting within Makkah on grounds derived from the events that characterized the conquest, he should remember that it had been a license granted temporarily to the Prophet, and virtually does not go for others. Ibn Abbas, R., narrated, the Prophet, Pbuh, said, Allah has made Makkah a sanctuary, so it was a sanctuary before me and will continue to be a sanctuary after me. It was made legal for me, i.e. I was allowed to fight in it, for a few hours of a day. It is not allowed to uproot its shrubs or to cut its trees, or to chase, or disturb, its game, or to pick up its fallen things except by a person who would announce that, what has found, publicly. Al-Abbas said, O Allah's Messenger, except the lemon grass, for it is used, by our goldsmiths and for our homes. The Prophet, Pbuh, then said, except the lemon grass. In this context, out of the spirit of revenge, the tribesmen of Quza killed a man from Layth tribe. Here the Prophet was indignant and ordered Quza to stop those pre-Islamic practices. He, moreover, gave the family of anyone killed the right to consider either of 2 options, blood money or just retribution. The killer is killed. After having delivered his address, the Prophet, Pbuh, rode to a small hill, Safa, not far from Al-Kaaba. Turning his face towards the sacred house, amidst a vast admiring and devotional multitude, he raised his hand in fervent prayer to Allah. The citizens of Medina who had gathered round him entertained fear, as Allah had given him victory over his native city, he might choose to stay here. He insisted on explanation of their fear, and so they spoke openly. He immediately dispelled their fears and assured them that he had lived with them and would die with them. Immediately after the great conquest, the Makkans came to realize that the only way to success lay in the avenue of Islam. They complied with the new realities and gathered to pledge fealty to the Prophet, Pbuh. The men came first, pledging full obedience in all areas they can afford. Then came the women to follow the men's example. The Prophet, Pbuh, with Umar bin al-Khattab receiving the pledge of fealty and communicating to them for him. Hind bint Utbah, Abu Sufyan's wife, came in the trail of women disguised lest the Prophet, Pbuh, should recognize and account for her, having chewed the liver of Hamza, his uncle. The Prophet, Pbuh, accepted their allegiance on condition that they associate none with Allah, to which they immediately agreed. He added that they should not practice theft. Here Hind complained that her husband, Abu Sufyan, was tight-fisted. Her husband interrupted granting all his worldly possessions to her. The Prophet, Pbuh, laughed and recognized the woman. She implored him to extend his pardon to her and efface all her previous sins. Some other conditions were appended, including the prohibition of adultery, infanticide or forging falsehood. To all these orders, Hind replied positively, swearing that she would not have come to take an oath of allegiance if she had had the least seed of disobedience to him. On returning home, she broke her idol, admitting her delusion as regards stone gods. The Messenger of Allah, Pbuh, stayed in Makkah for 19 days. During that period he used to define the way to Islam, guide people to the orthodox path. He ordered Abu Usaid al-Khuzai to restore the pillars of the holy sanctuary, sent missions to all quarters inviting them to adopt Islam and break down the graven images still lying in the vicinity of Makkah, and he did have all of them scrapped, inculcating in the believer's ears his words, "Whoever believes in Allah and the hereafter is supposed to scrap out the idols that should happen to be in his house." Shortly after the Great Conquest, the Prophet, PBUH, began to dispatch platoons and errands aiming at eliminating the last symbols reminiscent of pre-Islamic practices. He sent Khalid bin al-Walid in Ramadan 8 to a spot called Nakhla where there was a goddess called Al-Uzza venerated by Quraysh and Kanana tribes. It had custodians from Bani Shayban. Khalid, at the head of 30 horsemen, arrived at the spot and exterminated it. On his return, the Prophet, PBUH, asked him if he had seen anything there, to which Khalid gave a negative answer. Here, he was told that it had not been destroyed and he had to go there again and fulfill the task.